An old woman and her husband, cast aside by their children, bought a derelict drive-in movie theater for $10. What they built there became a legend in their small county, a place of light in the forgotten dark. They didn't seek fame or fortune. They sought a place to stand after the world had tried to knock them down for the last time. They found more than that. They found a purpose, a family, and a strange, quiet victory that echoed louder than any blockbuster film ever shown on their massive, weathered screen. Every night, as the sun bled out behind the western hills, the cars would start to arrive, their headlights cutting through the dusk. They came not just for the old movies, but for the feeling of the place itself. It was a sanctuary built from rust and resilience. But I need to take you back to the beginning, back to the silence of a packed-up house and the cold click of a motel room door. Dorothy adjusted her glasses, the fluorescent light of the Sunbreeze Motel office humming a tired, monotonous tune. The man behind the counter had a stain on his shirt shaped vaguely like Florida. He slid a plastic keycard across the worn laminate. It was a flimsy thing, a weak promise of security. Frank stood beside her, his large, calloused hands shoved deep into the pockets of his work pants, his posture a study in coiled tension. He hadn't said more than 10 words since they left the house. Their house. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner, a chemical ghost trying and failing to exorcise decades of transient sorrow. A single window looked out onto the parking lot, where their old pickup truck sat under the jaundiced glow of a sodium lamp. It was loaded with the curated remnants of 50 years of life, 2 boxes of photo albums, a chest of Frank's tools, Dorothy's sewing machine, and 3 suitcases of practical, joyless clothing. Everything else was gone. Sold. Liquidated. Dorothy sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sighed, a weary, defeated sound. She ran her hand over the cheap, nubby bedspread. It felt like sandpaper. She thought of her quilt, the one her grandmother had made, the one with the interlocking wedding ring pattern. Michael's wife, Jennifer, had probably already claimed it. A lovely vintage piece, she'd likely say to her friends, omitting the part about where it came from. Frank closed the door, and the sound of the lock engaging was unnervingly final. He walked to the window and stared out at the truck, his silhouette framed against the sickly orange light. He was a builder, a man who had spent his life constructing things. He had built their house, room by room, as the family grew. He had built the sturdy oak table where they ate every meal. He had built the bookshelves that held Dorothy's beloved novels. Now he was unbuilt, deconstructed. He said he'd call, Dorothy said, her voice small in the sterile room. Frank didn't turn. He won't. He didn't call. Michael, their son, the one with the sharp suit and the sharper smile, did not call. It had been his idea, this transition, a word so smooth and sterile it slid right past the truth. "It's just too much house for you two," he had said, his hands steepled on their own kitchen table. "The upkeep, the taxes. We found a wonderful assisted living community. Top-notch. It's for the best." Dorothy had looked at her daughter, Sarah, for support. Sarah, who had always been the softer one, the one who brought them wildflowers and called every Sunday. Sarah had just stared at her teacup, her knuckles white. "It makes sense, Mom," she had whispered, not meeting her mother's eyes. Complacent. Complicit. They hadn't seen the paperwork until it was too late. Power of attorney, signed years ago when Frank had his heart surgery. A precaution, Michael had called it. Dorothy, the bookkeeper, the one who had balanced their finances to the penny for 5 decades, had been so focused on Frank's recovery that she hadn't read the fine print. A mistake she would never forgive herself for. The house was sold in a private deal to a developer friend of Michael's. The wonderful assisted living community turned out to be a waiting list and a brochure full of smiling, silver-haired actors. The money from a sale? It was being managed in a trust for their long-term care. Michael had handed them $5,000 in cash and the keys to this motel. "Just to tide you over until a spot opens up," he'd said, his eyes already looking past them, toward his car, toward his future. Frank finally turned from the window. The look on his face was one she hadn't seen since the day his father died. A hollowed-out grief, mixed with a slow-burning rage that had nowhere to go. "You took the house, Dottie. You took our home." "I know," she said. It was an inadequate response to a monumental crime. For a week, they lived in the hum of the motel. They ate takeout from styrofoam containers. They watched game shows with the volume turned low. Frank would spend hours taking his tools out of their chest, cleaning them, oiling them, and putting them back, a silent, desperate ritual of purpose in a purposeless world. Dorothy, the observer, the planner, did what she always did. She took stock. She sat at the small, wobbly desk with a pen and a notepad from the motel lobby. She listed their assets. The pickup truck, Frank's tools, worth a fair bit to the right person. The $5,000, which after a week of motel bills and bad food, was now $4,627. She calculated their burn rate. At this pace, they would be broke in 3 months. Invisible, a statistic. 2 more elderly people swallowed by the cracks in a world that had no use for them. The despair was a physical weight. It sat on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She looked at Frank, asleep in the other bed, his face etched with worry even in slumber. For 50 years, they had been a team. He was the hands, she was the head. He was the quiet strength, she was the steady resolve. They had weathered storms, raised children, buried parents. They had built a life on the bedrock of their partnership. She would not let it end here, in a room that smelled like failure. She turned on the cheap laptop she'd insisted on keeping, its fan whirring to life with a pathetic little gasp. The motel's Wi-Fi was achingly slow, a thin, unreliable thread to the outside world. She didn't know what she was looking for. A job, maybe? Who hires a 72-year-old bookkeeper? A cheap apartment? They'd need first and last month's rent, a security deposit. Their dwindling cash wouldn't cover it. Her fingers moved over the keyboard, typing in search terms born of desperation. Cheap land, foreclosures, county auctions, page after page of properties they couldn't afford. Plots of undeveloped woods. Condemned houses that would cost a fortune to repair. And then she saw it. It was a listing on the county tax lien auction site. A single, grainy photo of a massive, weed-choked movie screen standing like a forgotten monolith against a pale sky. The description was stark clinical. Parcel 7B for commercial property. Formerly Starlight Drive-In, 124 acres. Structures include projection/concession building, ticket booth, and marquee. All structures in significant disrepair. Property sold as is. Opening bid, $10. $10. The absurdity of it made her lean closer. She clicked through the handful of other photos. The concession building was a concrete block shell, its windows boarded up. The marquee was a skeleton of rusted metal, a few plastic letters clinging to it, spelling out a nonsensical fragment. GNEWID. The speaker poles stood in crooked, silent rows, like a robot army that had died mid-march. Weeds grew through cracks in the asphalt. It was a ruin, a ghost. But Dorothy saw something else. She saw 124 acres. She saw a concrete block building that was still standing. She saw a well and a septic system noted in the property details. It was abandoned, yes. Forgotten, absolutely. But it was there. It was real. It was something to stand on. She got up and walked over to Frank's bed. She gently shook his shoulder. He startled awake, his eyes wide with the disorientation of a bad dream. "What is it? What's wrong?" "I think I found something," she said, her voice steady for the first time in days. She led him to the laptop. He stared at the screen, at the picture of the ruined drive-in. He looked at Dorothy, then back at the screen. He read the description, his lips moving silently. He was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the hum of the mini fridge and the distant groan of a truck downshifting on the highway. "It's a wreck, Dottie," he finally said, his voice rough with sleep. "It's been closed for 20 years. Probably full of snakes and vandals." "It has a well," she countered. "A septic. The main building is concrete block. You always said concrete block is honest. It doesn't hide its flaws. It's 12 acres of weeds and broken asphalt. What in God's name would we do with it?" Dorothy didn't have a grand plan. Not yet. She had only a spark, a flicker of an idea that felt more like instinct than logic. It was the opposite of the motel room. It was space. It was possibility. It was theirs if they were brave enough or foolish enough to claim it. We wouldn't be paying rent, she said simply. We could park the truck. Live in that. Fix up the building. Slowly, she pointed at the screen. It's $10, Frank. We spent more than that on dinner tonight. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the exhaustion in her face, but underneath it, he saw the flicker she felt. It was the same look she'd had when they decided to build the first addition onto the house themselves. The same look she'd had when she decided to start her own bookkeeping business from their kitchen table. It was the look that said, this is the way forward. He shook his head, a small, weary motion, but a faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was the first time she'd seen him smile in a week. A drive-in movie theater, he murmured, the words tasting strange and foreign. You're out of your mind. Is that a yes? She asked. He let out a long breath, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the last week with it. He reached out and put his hand over hers on the mouse pad. His hand was warm, solid. Real. I'm driving you to the county courthouse in the morning, he said. We'll bid $10. If someone outbids us, we walk away. But if they don't, he trailed off, staring at the picture of the giant, lonely screen. If they don't, Dorothy finished for him, her voice firm with a conviction that surprised even herself. Then it's ours. The county auction was held in a windowless, beige room in the basement of the courthouse. It smelled of old paper and weak coffee. They were the only ones there who weren't professional developers or lawyers in ill-fitting suits. They sat in the back, two gray-haired figures in a sea of sharks. Dorothy held her purse in her lap, her knuckles tight around the strap. Inside was a cashier's check for $10. When parcel 7B4 came up, the auctioneer announced it in a bored monotone. He showed the same grainy picture on a projector screen. A few of the developers chuckled. One muttered, "Tear down," to his neighbor. Opening bid, $10, the auctioneer droned. Do I have $10? Dorothy's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment of foolishness or fate. She raised her hand. It felt impossibly heavy. $10, she said, her voice clearer than she expected. The auctioneer looked at her over the top of his glasses, a flicker of surprise in his tired eyes. He scanned the room. I have $10. Do I hear 20? $20 for 124 acres. Silence. The developers looked at their phones. The lawyers shuffled their papers. The man who had muttered, "Tear down," just shook his head, a smirk on his face. To them, it wasn't an asset. It was a liability. It would cost more to clear the land than it was worth. $10 going once, the auctioneer said, his voice picking up a slightly more interested cadence. Frank's hand found hers. His grip was a silent anchor. $10 going twice. The room was still. Dorothy held her breath. Sold. The auctioneer banged a small wooden gavel, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. To the lady in the back for $10. An hour later, they walked out of the courthouse and into the bright sunlight, blinking. In Dorothy's purse was a deed, a flimsy piece of paper covered in official stamps and signatures that said they were the owners of the Starlight Drive-In. They owned a ruin. They drove out to see it that afternoon. The entrance was blocked by a rusted chain-link gate, held shut with a thick, corroded padlock. A faded sign, pocked with holes, read, "Closed. Frank got his bolt cutters from the tool chest." The snap of the lock breaking was loud and decisive. It felt like their first real act of ownership. He pushed the gate open. It screamed in protest, scraping a long arc into the dirt. They drove the truck through and parked in the middle of the vast, empty lot. They got out and just stood there, taking it all in. It was worse up close. The weeds weren't just weeds, they were small trees. The asphalt was a mosaic of cracks and potholes. The speaker poles were rusted through at the base, many leaning at drunken angles. The playground was a collection of faded, twisted metal. A single swing, its seat missing, creaked back and forth in the breeze. "Lord have mercy," Frank whispered, turning in a slow circle. Dorothy walked toward the main building. It was a low, squat bunker of a place built to withstand time and teenagers. The windows were boarded up tight. A heavy steel door was padlocked. Frank made short work of that lock, too. He pushed the door open. The air that rolled out was thick and musty, the smell of trapped decades. Dust motes danced like tiny ghosts in the single shaft of light from the open door. It was a cavern of shadows. They stepped inside. The concession stand was on the left. The counter was thick with dust. A popcorn machine sat like a museum piece, its glass cloudy. On the right were the doors to the restrooms. Straight ahead, a set of steep, narrow stairs led up to the projection booth. "Well," Frank said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "It's solid." He stamped his foot on the concrete floor. "Good foundation." Dorothy ran her hand along the dusty counter. Underneath the grime, the stainless steel was cool and smooth. This was where the life of the place had been. The nexus of popcorn and soda and first dates. She could almost hear the echoes of it. They explored the rest of the ground floor. The bathrooms were grim, but the porcelain of the toilets and sinks was intact beneath the filth. The storage rooms were filled with junk. Rotting bags of sugar, boxes of flattened paper cups, a calendar on the wall from 1998. Then they climbed the stairs to the projection booth. This was the heart. Two massive, ancient projectors stood side by side, hulking metal beasts covered in thick shrouds of dust. Cans of film lay scattered on shelves, their labels faded and peeling. A workbench was littered with old splicing equipment and burnt-out bulbs. A single wooden stool stood in front of a small, thick-paned window that looked out at the giant screen. Frank walked over to one of the projectors and laid a hand on it, a gesture of reverence. He was a mechanic at heart, a man who understood the language of machines. He ran his fingers over the gears and lenses. "Carbon arc," he murmured. "Haven't seen one of these in 40 years. They're dinosaurs. Can they be fixed?" Dorothy asked. He peered into the machine's guts, his expression one of intense concentration. "Maybe. The housings are good. It's the moving parts that'll be shot. Belts, motors. The lamps for sure." He wiped a layer of dust off a lens with his sleeve. "But the glass is good. German. They don't make them like this anymore." Dorothy walked to the small window and looked out. From here, she could see the entire property. The rows of speaker poles, the vast expanse of the lot, the screen standing patient and waiting. From this vantage point, it didn't look like a ruin. It looked like a field of possibilities. It looked like a kingdom. "We can live in here," she said, thinking aloud. "Downstairs. It's big enough. We can clean it out. Put a bed in one of the storage rooms." Frank came and stood beside her. He followed her gaze. "It's a concrete box, Dottie." "It's our concrete box," she replied. "No one can sell it out from under us. No one can kick us out." They spent the rest of the afternoon in a flurry of activity. They drove the truck into the building itself, parking it in the large open space of the concession area. It was their moving van and their bedroom. They swept. They shoveled out years of dirt and debris. They pulled the boards off one of the windows, letting in the late afternoon sun. As dusk fell, they sat on the tailgate of their truck inside their new, strange home and ate sandwiches they bought at a gas station. The setting sun painted the dusty air in shades of orange and pink. It was quiet, a deep, profound quiet that was nothing like the oppressive silence of the motel. It was the quiet of ownership, the quiet of a place that was waiting. "First thing tomorrow," Frank said, breaking the silence, "I need to see about the well. No point doing anything else if we don't have water." "And I," Dorothy said, looking at the grimy countertops, "am going to wage war on 50 years of Greece." It was a beginning, a strange, dusty, improbable beginning. The next morning, Frank found the wellhead near the back of the building, hidden under a tangle of thorny bushes. It was an old-fashioned hand pump, rusted solid. Next to it was a newer cap for a submersible electric pump. The power to the property had been cut off for 2 decades, the meter removed from the side of the building. "No power, no electric pump," he stated the obvious. "Let's see about this old fella." He spent 2 hours with a wire brush, a can of penetrating oil, and a wrench. He worked with a patient, focused intensity that Dorothy hadn't seen in him since before his heart trouble. He was in his element, solving a tangible problem. Finally, with a great groan of protest, the pump handle moved. He worked it back and forth, slowly at first, then with more force. For a long time, nothing happened but a dry, asthmatic sucking sound. "Come on, you old devil," he grunted. And then a trickle. A dark, rusty sludge sputtered from the spout. Frank kept pumping. The water slowly cleared from brown to yellow to, finally, a clear, cool stream. He caught some in his cupped hands and sniffed it. "Smells sweet," he said, a grin spreading across his face. He splashed it on his face. "It's cold. Deep well." It was their first victory. It felt monumental. While Frank wrestled with the well, Dorothy began her own battle inside. Armed with a bucket of well water, a stiff brush, and a bottle of industrial-strength cleaner she'd bought with their dwindling cash, she attacked the concession counter. She scrubbed until her arms ached. The layers of grime were like geological strata. But slowly, inch by inch, the gleam of stainless steel emerged. It was a small patch of order in a universe of chaos. By the end of the day, they were exhausted, filthy, but filled with a sense of accomplishment that was more nourishing than any food. They had water. They had a small, clean space. They had taken the first step in reclaiming their world. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Frank, the doer, focused on the essentials. He tackled the septic system next, finding the tank and the leach field. Miraculously, it seemed intact. He jury-rigged a temporary plumbing solution, getting one of the toilets to flush and one of the sinks to run with cold water. It was the height of luxury. He sealed the building, patching holes in the roof with tar and replacing the rotten plywood on the windows with sheets of plexiglass he scavenged from a dumpster behind a commercial glass company. Light flooded the space, chasing out the deepest shadows. He was a master of improvisation, using what he had, what he could find, what he could afford. Dorothy, the observer, the planner, managed their resources. She created a ledger, tracking every penny spent. Gas for the truck, cleaning supplies, tar, plexiglass, food. She also took on the project of the interior. She scrubbed walls. She painted. She found old, discarded furniture at the county dump, a table with 3 good legs, a chair that only needed a few screws, a mattress that, while stained, was dry and free of bugs. She disinfected everything with an almost religious fervor. They converted one of the large storage rooms into a bedroom. It was monastic, Spartan, but it was theirs. They moved the mattress in. Dorothy covered it with the cleanest of their sheets. That night, for the first time in a month, they slept in a bed that wasn't on wheels or in a motel that charged by the day. One afternoon, Frank was trying to coax life into the ancient generator he'd found in a back room. It was a huge, diesel-powered beast, probably meant for emergency backup. He needed parts, a fuel filter, a new battery, belts. He made a list. "I'm heading into town," he told Dorothy. "There's a hardware store, an old one. Hobbs Hardware. Maybe they'll have what I need." Hobbs Hardware was a relic from another time. The floors were worn wood, and the air smelled of sawdust, oil, and iron. It was run by a man as old as the store itself, a wiry fellow named Earl Hobbs with thick glasses and ink-stained fingers. Frank showed him the list. Earl peered at it. "Haven't seen a request for a filter for a 58 Onan in 20 years, he said, a note of interest in his gravelly voice. "What are you working on?" "Generator out at the old Starlight Drive-In," Frank said. Earl's eyebrows shot up. "You're the folks who bought that place?" "Heard someone paid $10 for it at the tax auction." Thought they were crazy. He looked Frank up and down, taking in the grease on his hands and the determination in his eyes. He saw a fellow tradesman, not a fool. "We might be," Frank admitted with a wry smile. Earl let out a wheezing laugh. "Well, crazy is more interesting than sensible." He shuffled toward the back of the store, into a labyrinth of shelves piled high with boxes. "I might have something in the back. Kept all the old stock. Never know when you'll need it." He returned 20 minutes later, covered in dust, but holding a box. And it was the filter and the belts. "Found these, too," he said, handing them to Frank. "Been sitting on that shelf since I was a young man." Frank asked him the price. Earl waved a dismissive hand. "Call it a welcome to the neighborhood gift. You get that beast running, you come back and tell me about it." This was something new, an act of kindness. Not pity, but professional courtesy. A recognition of a shared language, a shared respect for old machines and the men who understood them. Frank felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. He was their first ally. He drove back to the drive-in, the box of parts on the seat beside him like a treasure. He installed the new filter and belts. He hooked up a truck battery he'd recharged. He filled the tank with fresh diesel. He stood back, took a deep breath, and hit the ignition. The generator sputtered. It coughed a thick cloud of black smoke. It groaned and shuddered. Frank adjusted the choke. He fiddled with the fuel line. He whispered words of encouragement to it. And then, with a deafening roar, it caught. It settled into a steady, rhythmic chug-a-chug-a-chug, a mechanical heartbeat. Frank flipped a large breaker switch on the wall. A single, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered to life. It cast a warm, yellow glow over the dusty concrete floor. Light. Power. They had power. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at the light bulb. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He allowed a laugh, a loud, deep, genuine laugh. The first one in months. When Dorothy came out of their makeshift bedroom to see what the noise was, she found him standing under the light, his face tilted up, a huge grin splitting his face. She looked from his face to the glowing bulb, and she understood. She started to cry, not tears of sadness or despair, but tears of overwhelming, bone-deep relief. They were no longer in the dark. The generator was a turning point. It changed everything. With power, the world expanded. They could work after dark. They could plug in a hot plate and cook a real meal. They could have a small refrigerator. They could have a fan to stir the thick summer air. Frank, energized by his success, turned his attention back to the projection booth. It became his sanctuary, his cathedral. He disassembled the projectors with the care of a surgeon. He cleaned every gear, every spring, every lens. He used the internet on Dorothy's laptop to hunt for obscure parts, ordering them from specialty websites and having them delivered to a post office box in town. Dorothy, meanwhile, continued to carve out a home from the chaos. She scrubbed the bathrooms until they gleamed. She planted a small garden in a patch of dirt behind the building, using seeds she'd bought with their grocery money. Tomatoes, zucchini, lettuce. A small patch of green life in a sea of asphalt and rust. They were a closed system, a two-person society rebuilding a world from scratch. They spoke little, but they moved with a synchronized purpose that had been honed over 50 years. Frank would hold a board. Dorothy would hand him the nails. Dorothy would point out a problem. Frank would find a solution. One sweltering afternoon, as Dorothy was weeding her fledgling garden, she heard a car coming up the long, gravel driveway. It was a rare sound. They had few visitors, other than the occasional teenager looking for a place to park or a curious local slowing down to gawk at the signs of life. This car was different. It was an old, battered sedan that rattled as if it might fall apart at any moment. It pulled to a stop near the concession building, and the engine died with a final shuddering gasp. The driver's side door opened, and a young woman got out. She couldn't have been more than 20. She was visibly pregnant, her belly straining the fabric of her thin dress. She looked tired and scared. She stood by her car, clutching her purse, looking at the strange, half-repaired building as if she wasn't sure what it was. Dorothy put down her trowel and wiped her hands on her apron. She walked slowly toward the girl, not wanting to frighten her. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice gentle. The young woman flinched. I'm sorry," she stammered. "My car. It just died. I saw the gate was open. I didn't know anyone lived here." "We do," Dorothy said simply. "My name is Dorothy. This is my husband, Frank." Frank had emerged from the building, drawn by the sound of the car. He stood on the porch, wiping his greasy hands on a rag, his expression cautious. "I'm Lily," the girl said. "I don't want to be any trouble. I don't know what to do." She looked at her broken-down car, and her face crumpled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I have nowhere to go." It was a story Dorothy heard in the girl's silence, in the fear in her eyes, in the protective way she held one hand over her belly. A boyfriend who'd left, a family who'd kicked her out, another person falling through the cracks. Dorothy looked at Frank. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. It was a conversation they had without words. "Well," Dorothy said, turning back to Lily. "First things first. You look like you could use a glass of cold water and a place to sit in the shade. And I'm sure Frank can take a look at your car." Lily stayed. Frank diagnosed her car's problem as a dead alternator, a repair they couldn't afford and he didn't have the parts for. But that ceased to matter. Lily told them her story in halting fragments. She was fleeing an abusive boyfriend. She had been living in her car for 2 weeks. She had $57 to her name. Dorothy made her a bed in the second storage room. It was just a mattress on the floor, but to Lily, it was a palace. It was safe. Lily's arrival changed the dynamic of the place. It was no longer just about Frank and Dorothy's survival. It was about something more. Lily was quiet and shy, but she was a hard worker. She insisted on earning her keep. She helped Dorothy in the garden. She learned to scrub and paint. She had a knack for organizing, and she helped Dorothy turn a corner of the concession area into a functional kitchen. The drive-in was no longer just a project. It was becoming a refuge. A month later, they had another visitor. This time it was a boy, a teenager named Leo with a skateboard under his arm and a backpack slung over his shoulder. He was trying to siphon gas from their truck. Frank caught him. The boy was terrified, expecting a beating or the police. Instead, Frank, who had seen the raw hunger in the boy's eyes, took him inside and Dorothy made him a sandwich. He ate it in 3 bites, like a starving animal. He told them he'd run away from foster home, where he was being bullied. He had been sleeping in the woods for a week. Leo stayed, too. He was sullen and mistrustful at first, but Frank put him to work. He started teaching the boy basic carpentry, how to measure twice and cut once, how to use a hammer without smashing his thumb. He gave him tasks, responsibilities. Leo began to unfurl. The hard shell of his anger started to crack, revealing a smart, capable kid underneath. Then came Agnes, an elderly woman they found sleeping on a bench in town, clutching a plastic bag with all her worldly possessions. Her landlord had sold her apartment building, and she had been evicted. She had nowhere to go. She was proud and didn't want charity. So Dorothy gave her a job. She was officially in charge of the garden. Agnes, who had grown up on a farm, had a magic touch. The small patch of dirt began to flourish under her care, producing more vegetables than the 4 of them could eat. Slowly, unintentionally, they were building a family. A strange, motley collection of discarded people. A found family. The drive-in became a haven, a small, self-sustaining ecosystem. Frank and Leo worked on the property, making repairs. Dorothy and Lily managed the household. Agnes tended the garden, providing them with fresh food. The money was still a constant worry. Dorothy's ledger was a testament to their thrift. But now there were more mouths to feed. They took on odd jobs in town. Frank and Leo did small engine repairs and carpentry work. Dorothy and Lily did mending and cleaning for some of the local businesses. They pooled their meager earnings. It was not charity exactly, more like an exchange, a commune born of necessity. All the while, Frank continued his obsessive work in the projection booth. It was his opus. He had rebuilt the motors. He had sourced new belts. He had painstakingly cleaned and calibrated the lenses. The final piece of the puzzle was the lamps. The old carbon arc lamps were obsolete and dangerous. He needed to convert the projectors to use modern xenon bulbs. It was a complex, expensive conversion. Earl Hobbs, their first ally, came through again. He knew a guy who was dismantling an old single-screen theater in the next state. He made a call. A week later, Frank and Leo drove the pickup truck 3 hours and came back with 2 used, but functional xenon lamp houses. They had cost nearly every penny the community had saved, but Frank was ecstatic. It took him another 2 weeks to retrofit them. The day he finished, he called them all up to the projection booth. The sun was setting. The air was cool. "All right," he said, his voice tight with anticipation. Moment of truth. He had found an old reel of film and it can labeled Cartoon Carnival. It was probably brittle and faded, but it was something. He threaded the film through the projector with practiced ease. Lily, Leo, and Agnes watched, captivated. Dorothy stood by the window, her hand on the cool glass, looking out at the giant, blank screen. Frank killed the lights in the booth. He flipped a series of switches. The projector whirred to life. A brilliant, intense beam of light shot out of the small window, cutting a perfect cone through the dusty air. It hit the screen, a perfect, glowing white rectangle in the deepening twilight. It worked. A cheer went up in the small booth. Leo hooped. Lily clapped her hands. Agnes made the sign of the cross. Frank, his face illuminated by the glow of the machine, looked at Dorothy and smiled. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. Then, an image flickered onto the screen. It was a cartoon rabbit dancing a jig. The image was scratched and faded, the color washed out, but it was there. It was moving. It was magic. They stood there for a long time, watching the silent, dancing rabbit on the giant screen. The Starlight Drive-In was alive. Word began to spread through the small town. The crazy old couple who bought the dump weren't just living there. They were fixing it up. They had gotten the projector working. Curiosity got the better of the locals. One Friday night, Dorothy had an idea. "Let's show a movie," she said, "for anyone who wants to come." "We only have the one reel of cartoons," Frank pointed out. "Then we'll show the cartoons," she said. "And Agnes has more zucchini than we know what to do with. We'll make zucchini bread. We won't charge anything. We'll just open the gates." So they did. Leo made a crude, hand-painted sign and put it out by the road. "Free cartoons tonight at dusk." They set up a table and laid out slices of Agnes's zucchini bread and glasses of well water. They didn't expect anyone to come, but they did. At first, it was just one car, then two, then a whole line of them, pulling into the lot, their headlights illuminating the motley community standing there, waiting. There were families with kids, teenagers on dates, older folks who remembered the drive-in from their youth. They parked in the weed-choked rows. They didn't have the old speakers that hung on the windows, so Frank and Leo had dragged a couple of old PA speakers out and aimed them at the lot. The sound was tinny and awful, but nobody cared. As dusk settled, Frank fired up the projector. The dancing rabbit flickered to life on the giant screen. A collective gasp went through the crowd, followed by applause. For an hour, the forgotten field was filled with the sound of cartoon antics and the laughter of children. It was a shared moment of simple, unexpected joy. Afterward, people came up to the concession stand, not just for the free bread, but to talk, to share memories, to thank them. One man pressed a $20 bill into Dorothy's hand. "For the electricity," he said. Another woman gave her a bag of apples from her tree. Earl Hobbs was there. He handed Frank a box. "Found some old trailers in the back room," he said. "Previews of coming attractions from 1975. Thought you might like them." It became a weekly event. Every Friday night. They never charged admission, but people always left donations. A few dollars, a bag of groceries, a box of old paperbacks. A local farmer started dropping off a crate of eggs every Saturday morning. The community was no longer just the people living at the drive-in. It was expanding to include the town. They used the donations to buy more film. Old B-movies, classic westerns, public domain films they could get for cheap. Frank taught Leo how to run the second projector, allowing for seamless reel changes. Lily, her due date approaching, took over managing the donations and the concession stand, which now offered popcorn, made on a new machine someone had donated, and soda. The Starlight was no longer a haven. It was a destination, a center of gravity for a community that hadn't realized it was missing one. But their growing success did not go unnoticed, and not all the attention was welcome. One Tuesday morning, a shiny new county vehicle pulled up the driveway. A man in a crisp shirt with an official-looking badge clipped to his pocket got out. He had a clipboard in his hand and a sour expression on his face. "I'm Inspector Davies from the County Code Enforcement Office," he announced, his eyes scanning the property with undisguised disapproval. "We've received a complaint." Dorothy's heart sank. A complaint. Two words that could undo everything. "A complaint about what?" she asked, her voice calm and even, betraying none of the fear churning in her stomach. "Illegal residency. Unpermitted construction. Operating a public gathering space without a license." "Take your pick," he said, making a note on his clipboard. "According to our records, this property is zoned for commercial use only. and is condemned as unfit for habitation. He walked around, pointing out violations. The makeshift plumbing, the generator, which he called a fire hazard, the unpaved parking lot, the lack of proper sanitation facilities for a public crowd. He was a man who saw the world not in possibilities, but in infractions. "This is not a home," he said, gesturing at the concession building. "This is a derelict commercial structure. You can't live here." "We had nowhere else to go," Dorothy said quietly. The inspector was unmoved. "That's not the county's problem." He tore a sheet from his clipboard and handed it to her. It was a notice, a long list of violations, each one tied to a section of the county code. At the bottom, in big, red letters, it said, "Order TO vacate." They had 30 days. 30 days to correct all the violations, an impossible task that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, or abandon the property. If they failed to comply, the county would take possession and demolish the structures. The system had found them. The impersonal, bureaucratic force that had no room for nuance, no space for humanity. It was a death sentence for the Starlight. That night, the mood at the drive-in was funereal. The generator was off. They sat in the dark, the silence punctuated by Lily's quiet sobs. Leo kicked angrily at a loose rock. Agnes prayed with her rosary beads. Frank just sat, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "It's over," he said, his voice hollow. "We can't fight the county." Dorothy looked at the notice in her hands. The cold, official language. The endless list of rules they had broken. She thought of the motel room, the smell of despair, the feeling of being invisible. She looked around at her found family, at the home they had carved out of nothing. No, not again. She would not be made invisible again. "He's just a man with a clipboard, Frank," she said, her voice cutting through the gloom. "He's following a set of rules. We're not going to run. We're going to follow the rules, too." "You heard him," Frank said. "It would take a fortune. We don't have a fortune." "No," she agreed. "We don't. But we have this." She swept her hand out, indicating the drive-in, the people, the community they had built. "We have us." The next day, Dorothy went to the town library. She spent 8 hours reading the county code book. She took meticulous notes. She learned about zoning variances, occupancy permits, and public assembly licenses. The rules were complex, a labyrinth of legal jargon, but they weren't arbitrary. There was a logic to them, a path through them, however narrow. She came back with a plan, a desperate, audacious plan. They would bring the drive-in up to code. Not all of it, not the whole 12 acres, but one part of it, the concession building. They would get it legally designated as a mixed-use dwelling and a licensed place of public assembly for under 50 people. "We need an architect to draw up plans," she announced, laying out her notes on the table. "We need a licensed electrician and a plumber to sign off on Frank's work. We need to pass a fire inspection and a health inspection." It was an impossible list. But then, something amazing happened. The community they had fostered started to give back. When word got out about the condemnation notice, people rallied. Earl Hobbs put them in touch with a retired architect who hated the county bureaucracy. He came out, looked at what they had done, and listened to their story. He drew up a full set of professional blueprints for a nominal fee, officially designating the living quarters and the public concession space. A licensed electrician, a man whose kids came to the free movie nights, spent a weekend going over Frank's wiring. He showed him how to ground it properly, how to install the right kind of breaker box. He signed off on the work for the price of a tank of gas. A plumber did the same for the septic and water lines. The whole town seemed to pitch in. A local paving company dropped off a truckload of gravel for free, and a dozen volunteers helped Frank and Leo spread it over the parking area, creating a safe, stable surface. The farmer who brought them eggs organized a paint-the-screen day. 20 people showed up with rollers and buckets of white paint, and by the end of the day, the giant screen was a brilliant, uniform white, no longer faded and stained. It was a barn-raising, a modern-day barn-raising for a cathedral of cinema. They worked tirelessly for 29 days. They were a whirlwind of activity, fueled by coffee, Agnes's zucchini bread, and a shared, desperate hope. Lily, despite being in her last weeks of pregnancy, ran the command center, coordinating volunteers and supplies. On the 29th day, they were as ready as they would ever be. The plumbing was up to code. The wiring was safe. They had fire extinguishers and illuminated exit signs. The concession area was spotless, the stainless steel gleaming. The bathrooms had hot water. The blueprints were framed and hung on the wall. But as Dorothy was doing a final check of her paperwork, another car pulled up the driveway. Not a county vehicle, a luxury sedan, a black BMW. Michael. He got out of the car, dressed in one of his sharp suits. He looked around at the bustling, transformed drive-in with a look of utter bewilderment. He saw the new gravel, the painted screen, the people working. "Mother," he said, spotting Dorothy on the porch. "What in God's name is all this?" Dorothy felt a cold calm settle over her. She had been expecting this confrontation, wondering when he would hear about their strange new life. "It's our home, Michael," she said, her voice level. "Your home? It's a condemned ruin. I've been getting calls. People are saying you're living here, running some kind of cult." He gestured dismissively at Leo, who was sweeping the porch. "We're living here," she corrected him, "and we're running a community. There's a difference." "This is insane," he said, his voice rising. "This is embarrassing. You're making a spectacle of yourselves. I have a reputation in this town." "We were invisible in a motel room," Dorothy said, her eyes boring into his. "I don't think you were embarrassed then. That was for your own good, to protect you, to manage your assets." "You mean to steal our home and our money," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. He had the grace to flush. "That's not true. The money is safe. It's in a trust. For your care. Show me the trust documents." "Michael," she said. The bookkeeper in her was taking over. "Show me the statements. Show me where the money from the sale of our house went." He sputtered. It's complicated. You wouldn't understand." "Try me," she said. "I balanced our books for 50 years. I understand numbers." Just then, Lily came out onto the porch. She stood beside Dorothy, her hand on her large belly. Michael stared at her, then back at his mother, his face a mask of disgust and confusion. "What is this?" he demanded. "You've taken in strays?" "We've taken in family," Dorothy said. "Something you know very little about." It was the final blow. His face hardened. "Fine," he spat. "You want to live in this dump? You want to play Queen of the Hobos? Fine. But don't come crawling to me when the county tears it down around your ears. I wash my hands of you." He got back in his shiny car and sped away, kicking up a cloud of new gravel. Dorothy watched him go. She felt a profound sadness, but no regret. That door was closed. She turned and put a protective arm around Lily. "He's gone," she said. The next morning, on the 30th day, Inspector Davies returned. He walked in, clipboard at the ready, a smug look on his face, expecting to find the property abandoned. Instead, he found Dorothy, Frank, and their entire found family waiting for him on the porch of a clean, repaired, and painted building. "Good morning, Inspector," Dorothy said, handing him a folder. "Here is our application for an occupancy permit, our business license application, and the certified plans from our architect. The licensed plumber and electrician have already filed their reports with your office. We are ready for our inspection." Davies was stunned into silence. He took the folder, his smug expression replaced by one of disbelief. He spent the next 3 hours going over the building with a fine-toothed comb. He checked every outlet. He flushed every toilet. He measured the height of the countertops. He read every line of the blueprints. He was silent, grim, looking for a flaw, a single reason to deny them. But he couldn't find one. They had followed every rule. They had met every code. Finally, he stood in the middle of the concession area. He looked at the gleaming popcorn machine. He looked at the fresh paint on the walls. He looked at the small, thriving community standing there, watching him, holding their collective breath. He let out a long, slow sigh. He took a pen from his pocket, uncapped it, and signed the bottom of the inspection form. He tore off a copy and handed it to Dorothy. "You passed," he said, the words sounding like they were being physically pulled from him. He shook his head, a look of grudging admiration in his eyes. "This isn't a derelict building anymore," he said, looking around. I don't know what it is, but it's up to code. He turned and walked out to his car without another word. A wave of relief, so powerful it was dizzying, washed over Dorothy. She looked at the signed paper in her hand. It was more than a permit. It was a declaration of independence. It was their victory. That Friday, the movie night was a celebration. The entire town seemed to show up. The lot was full. The donations box overflowed. In the middle of the second feature, Lily went into labor. They rushed her to the county hospital, and at 3 a.m., she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Stella. Star. The story of the Starlight Drive-In and its strange, resilient community became local legend. A reporter from the regional paper came and did a story. A big front-page article with a picture of Dorothy and Frank standing in front of the giant, white screen, surrounded by their found family, with Lily holding baby Stella. The article mentioned, in passing, the circumstances that had led them to the drive-in. It mentioned an unnamed son who had sold their house out from under them. That was all it took. The district attorney's office, prompted by the public outcry and a quiet call from a sympathetic town official, opened an investigation into Michael. They subpoenaed his bank records. They looked into the private sale of his parents' house. They found the trust was just his personal bank account. Michael was charged with felony elder fraud. The developer who bought the house was implicated. The legal battle was swift and brutal. Michael lost everything. His reputation, his job, his money. The court seized his assets to pay restitution to Frank and Dorothy. They didn't take the money. They had the court put it into a new, real trust. Its purpose? To fund the Starlight Haven, as it was now officially called. A nonprofit foundation dedicated to providing shelter and a fresh start for people who had fallen through the cracks. The drive-in flourished. With proper funding, they were able to make real improvements. They installed a proper sound system, broadcasting the movie audio over FM radio. They paved the lot. They built a series of small, simple cabins at the back of the property, providing safe, temporary housing for more people like Lily and Leo and Agnes. Leo, now a skilled carpenter under Frank's tutelage, supervised the construction. Agnes expanded the garden into a small farm, providing food for the haven and selling the surplus at the local farmer's market. Lily, with baby Stella on her hip, became the full-time director of the foundation, her natural gift for organization blossoming. One day, a car pulled into the drive-in, a modest, 10-year-old sedan. It was Sarah. She got out of the car, looking older, tireder. She had divorced her husband. She had lost her connection to Michael. She was alone. She stood before Dorothy, her face streaked with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I was weak. I was a coward. I should have stood up for you." Dorothy looked at her daughter, her lost, broken daughter. She thought of all the anger she had held on to, and she let it go. It was too heavy to carry anymore. She didn't offer platitudes or easy forgiveness. She just looked at Sarah, then gestured toward the concession building, where the lights were on and the smell of dinner was drifting out. "The door's open," she said. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. The drive-in showed movies 3 nights a week in the summer, drawing crowd from all over the county. The Starlight Haven became a fixture, a respected institution. Frank and Dorothy, now in their late 70s, stepped back from the day-to-day operations, letting the younger generation take the lead. They spent their evenings sitting on the porch of the concession building, which was now their comfortable, legal home. They would watch the cars pull in. They would listen to the laughter of the children on the new playground that Leo had built. One evening, as a classic black-and-white film played on the screen, Frank took Dorothy's hand. His was still rough and calloused, but his grip was gentle. "You were right, Dottie," he said, looking out at the world they had built. It wasn't a wreck. It was a foundation. Dorothy leaned her head on his shoulder. She looked at the faces in the cars, illuminated by the flickering light from the screen. She saw families. She saw young couples in love. She saw her own found family, working, living, thriving. She thought of the cold, silent motel room. It felt like a lifetime ago, a different world. They had been thrown away, discarded as useless. But here, in the ruins of a forgotten dream, they had found their purpose. They had not just built a home, they had built a future. Frank had installed a single, permanent light on the porch of the concession building. A small, sturdy lamp that stayed on all night, every night. It was a beacon, a promise. It said, simply, that this was a place of safety, a place of light. It burned steadily in the vast, quiet dark of the countryside, a single, unwavering star.